Hey guys, thanks for joining me at Iron Monk. I'm Jared Milirons. I'm one of the co-founders here. I graduated from OSU, got my undergrad in 2005 with a biology degree, and then I stuck around and got my master's in business in '07. I fell in love with Stillwater, never left Stillwater. I'm originally from Duncan, Oklahoma, and kind of followed my brother here to college and never left, fell in love with it. Originally decided to get my degree in biology. Thought I wanted to go to optometry school or med school, and I had a professor in my marketing class. I took marketing as an elective, and my professor was talking about how the MBA program at OSU was looking for non-traditional students to apply for the MBA program, students that didn't have a business undergrad. And I didn't even know that was a possibility. I didn't know you could apply for a master's in a certain area and not have an undergrad in that area. And so it sparked my interest. I knew I liked business. I liked that side of things. And so I applied and actually got in on my first application, got accepted. And so it's amazing how much that influences what I do today. The things I learned in the MBA program, the amount of presentations I had to do, the amount of networking, the amount of just social skills that I learned through the MBA program, not to mention all the business things I learned in the program. It's played a huge impact on where I'm at today, personally, and as being a business owner, being an entrepreneur. So it's been a huge impact on my life. What OSU, how big of a part OSU played in that. About 10, 12 years ago, I met my business partner, Dave Monks. We started tossing around the idea of starting a brewery. He'd been brewing back in the 90s. And he kind of got out of it for a while, and then he got me into brewing when we met, and then we started brewing together. And then my business background and his science background combined, we decided, why not turn this into more than just a hobby? We could actually turn this into a business, and that's what we tried to do and successfully did. And so that was, about 6 years ago is when we opened the doors at Iron Monk. We just celebrated our 6th anniversary, and I'll give you a little bit of history on how we ended up where we are. We're in about a 14,000 square foot building in downtown Stillwater. We knew we always wanted to be in downtown Stillwater. We looked for quite a while to try to find a building. We finally came across this building that we're in. It was actually originally built as a grocery store back in the 50s. It was a Safeway. And then AT&T purchased it from Safeway. They converted it into an office building. They used it for a long time, and then it sat empty for about 12 years, and then that's when we came across it. It was pretty crazy when we got it. It was an office building. It had carpet on all the floors. It had an 8-foot drop ceiling on all the ceilings. And so we knew we had a lot of work to do to get it to where we wanted it, but the bones were there. And so we saw the cool brick walls. We saw the cool trusses in the rafters. It just had this really cool brewery vibe to it, and we just fell in love with it instantly, and we wanted to do that. So we worked on the building for about 2 years to get it ready. We had to put in plumbing and electrical and all kinds of things, and all the equipment, obviously, to brew the beer itself. So that took about 1.5 years, 2 years. Finally, got the building ready where we could brew out of it. We haven't opened the tap room at this point. This was a production brewery only. We knew we had a space that we wanted to create a tap room eventually, but at that point it was just a production brewery. So our first beer that we brewed was our milk stout. We haven't changed that recipe once. We've actually won awards with that beer, and that was the very first batch we ever brewed, and we haven't changed the recipe since. Shortly after the milk stout, we came out with our Payne County Imperial IPA, which is one of the biggest beers we've ever brewed. It's got a lot of alcohol. It's about 10% alcohol. And then our third one, which is probably what you guys are most familiar with, is our Stilly Wheat. It's our flagship beer. It's the beer that you see all over the state of Oklahoma, Stillwater, even football games, basketball games, baseball games. So that's our flagship beer. If you see an orange can that says Stilly Wheat on it, then that's our most popular beer. We opened our tap room later the same year that we started the production brewery. It's been really good for the community. It's a cool place you could come try everything we make. We don't distribute everything that we make in our tap room. We have 14 different beers on tap at any given time. We try to come out with a new one every Thursday. It doesn't last long. That one sells out really quick. But it's a cool place that people can come, but it's also good for us because we get an idea of what people like. And then there's been numerous times that those beers that do really well in the tap room, we'll turn those into something year round or maybe a seasonal that we'll package. And so it's a cool kind of incubator test batch that we can do in the tap room. It's cool, you can come in and do tours. We do tours every Saturday at 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock. So not only can you see the tap room, but you can come back here and actually see the production side of things and learn a little bit more about that. So yeah, come on in and join us for a tour sometime. A big part of our mission here at Iron Monk is to give back to the community. I've already mentioned that I fell in love with Stillwater when I came. I fell in love with OSU, and a big part of my life, obviously, is Stillwater and OSU. I've lived here for 21 years now. I call it home, and so we give back at any opportunity we can. We donate to charities. We always do tours for classes. If any OSU professors ask us, hey, you know, our class, I think we can tie it to your business, whether it's the mechanical side of things, whether it's the business side of things, we can always tie those things together. So we always love to do tours for students. We always love to donate to charities in Stillwater. Not only Stillwater, all of Oklahoma. We finally have to draw the line somewhere, and sometimes we've had to say no because we just can't afford to give so much. But we hardly ever say no to anybody in Stillwater. We love our local community, and like I said before, a big part of our mission is to give back to Stillwater and to OSU. If I had any advice to give to somebody that wants to start their own business, I think that's a two-part answer. The first advice I would give is do your homework, research what you're getting yourself into. My business partner Dave and I, we researched starting a brewery in Stillwater, Oklahoma for probably 2 years before we actually did it. We wanted to make sure it was feasible in Stillwater for one. We wanted to make sure it was feasible in Oklahoma, and we weren't going to get ourselves into something that wasn't actually profitable. So that would be my first piece of advice, is actually do your homework and make sure it will work. My second piece of advice, and I think is probably the most important, is take the jump. Take the leap. Do it. Don't be afraid to do it. The first thing that I did was buy rental property, and if I would have never bought that first house, then I wouldn't be capable to even open this brewery. So whatever it is, if it's something smaller like rental property, take small steps, but take leaps. Don't be afraid to. Take those leaps, take those steps, and don't be scared. You live in the best country in the world, and you've got the freedom to own your own business, and there's nothing, I think, better for a career than owning your own business. So don't be afraid to start your own business.
So this is where the process starts. This is our mill room where we have all of our different types of grain that we use in the beer. And then to start the process, we put it in our mill here, which will grind up all of the grain that we have to make it fine, because then that's what we want to achieve when we put it into the next process, so we can get those sugars out to make the beer. This is Sam Mosley, our head brewer. He's going to go over a little bit more of the beer process, the making of it. Take it away.
Hello. So I want to say I'm holding my hand up, not because I want to ask anyone a question, but because I smashed my fingers this morning, and they don't throb as bad when it's above my heart. So please disregard my hand being up. But yeah, I'm the head brewer here at Iron Monk. I enjoy my job, and around me are fermentation vessels, and we're on a 40 barrel system, and so most of our tanks are right around 40 barrels. Some of them are a little bit smaller, 35, some are a little bit bigger, 45, but for the most part they're around 40 barrels, which equates to a little over 1,200 gallons. And each one of our tanks, they're conical fermenters, so if you look at the fermenter itself, it has this cone shape at the bottom, and this was designed over years and years and years. Brewers discovered that yeast likes to settle it's really efficiently in a cone, versus if it was just flat, you know, a square, whatever other shape you want to think of it as. But it helps the yeast settle to the bottom, and then you can actually reuse yeast from brew to brew, depending on your beer and depending on how many generations your yeast are. But having this conical fermenter allows you to very efficiently harvest yeast so that you can reuse it from brew to brew. All right, so Kristen earlier described the mill, and so our mill takes whole barley and it cracks it so that it's open, that shell on the grain is now open, and so the enzymes can act, and they act upon the starches that are in those grains, and they convert those starches into more simple sugars that yeast can actually consume. This behind me is our mash tun, and above the mash tun is the hopper. And so after the grain gets milled, it is put through an auger and falls into our hopper up here. And it's kind of just a holding tank for grist. Grist is the cracked grain after you've already milled it. And so that's called the grist hopper. And then when you're ready to brew, there's a chute at the bottom of the grist hopper. It's not attached right now, if you can see it, but you basically open the chute to whatever desired amount to let the grain start falling into the mash tun, and you're mixing it with hot water and mixing all that cracked grain, all that grist with the hot water activates those enzymes, because those enzymes are active at around 150 degrees. All right, so now our grain has been mixed up with our hot water, and now we have this sugary liquid after letting it soak for an hour, and that sugary liquid is now called wort, W-O-R-T. And we take the wort and we transfer it into our kettle through this fancy manifold here. All it does is it just redistributes where liquids go, and so we transfer our liquid from our mash tun into our kettle, where then we can heat it up and boil it. And boiling does a few things. First, it essentially sanitizes that liquid. It kills everything in it. You know, that's why when you go camping, you boil your water. Same reason here, but also it helps, as it's boiling, a lot of volatile compounds come off of the liquid that you don't want in your finished beer. And lastly, it helps concentrate the beer, because you have water coming off, and so those sugars are more and more concentrated for the longer the boil. So for a really heavy beer, you want to boil a very long time. Our Imperial Stout, we boil upwards to 4 hours, and where our Stilly Wheat, it's a lighter beer. We don't want that much alcohol in it, so we only boil it for about an hour. And an hour is a standard boil time. But once she's done boiled, we're gonna cool it down through our heat exchanger, and we're gonna transfer it into one of our fermenters that we looked at earlier, and we're gonna put some yeast on it, and the yeast does the rest of the work. So here to my left, we have one of our conical fermenters, and it is actively fermenting. It's actually closer towards the end of the fermentation because it's Monday and it had the whole weekend to ferment. And so what's happening in here is our yeast is consuming those sugars, and it's producing alcohol and CO2. And so in this blow-off tube here, what you're seeing is air bubbles, and that air bubble is actually CO2 blowing off from the active fermentation. And then at some point, I can measure the gravity of the liquid, and so I can measure the amount of sugar that's left in the liquid, and so I know if fermentation is close to being done or it still needs time to go. It's basically my way of monitoring if the yeast is doing their job. But once fermentation is over, we close this valve. That's called spunding, and so now pressure can't release out of the tank, and so pressure will start building up in the tank, and then a day or two later we'll drop the temperature, and so everything can settle out. As temperatures cool down, yeast becomes less active and they'll flocculate down, and as we mentioned earlier, they'll flocculate into this conical fermenter in this cone here to later be either dumped or harvested for another brew.
And then what's the final product?
The final product is beer. And so once you get your yeast out of there, we want to take this beer and we transfer it into another tank, specifically a bright tank. Luckily, our fermenters double as bright tanks, but for all intents and purposes, a bright tank is a squat. See how it doesn't have that big conical fermenter? And being this shape, it can hold more pressure. And so we pressurize that finished product in a bright tank, and so it has carbonation. And then once it's carbonated, you can put it in a keg or a can, and then put it into your gullet.